like to welcome all of you as well. I'm Martha Blomquist. I'm a senior site manager with the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges. And I'm very pleased to be welcoming all of you to this webinar on a brand new resource that the National Council has been working on with our partners, Annie E. Casey Foundation, for quite some time. And it's just so exciting to be at the point of we've got it available and we're sharing it. So, you know, you are folks who are seeing the first group really to see this live toolkit that we have as a digital version on our web page, the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges web page. So anyways, welcome. And we want this to be very interactive. We want to keep you engaged. So we'll have lots of different opportunities to connect with you and have you connect with us. So at this point, if we could, Malika, if you could move on to the next slide, we have our disclaimer here that we certainly want to acknowledge that this webinar is made possible by a grant with Annie E. Casey Foundation. Points of view or opinions are those of the faculty and the presentation team and do not necessarily represent the official position or policies of the Annie E. Casey or NCGFCJ, but they do support what we're doing for sure. I wanted to let y'all know that you can earn 1.5 hours of CLE credit and for participating in today's webinar. And so how that will work is after the webinar, if you could email Malika Fahey for that information. It will take a few days. It's not available right now, but she will be able to provide you with a letter of attendance for your participation in today's session. So that's a good thing. I'm sure that your folks are happy to hear that. So with that, I'd like us to move on to just giving me the opportunity to introduce very briefly my colleagues that I just so enjoy working with. And then they will say more about themselves and their jurisdictions in a bit. But I'd like to introduce Judge Denise Navarre-Cubbin, who is with the court in Lucas County, that's Toledo, Ohio. And then Judge Sheila Calloway, she's in Davidson County, that's Nashville, Tennessee. And then Judge Jeffrey Gaither is in Indianapolis, Marion County. And I'm so pleased to have them join us. You may recognize their names. They're pioneers in the field of juvenile justice reform, and they'll be sharing with us some of their experiences that the toolkit on transforming probation focuses on, and they've been working in the trenches too and can share their experiences. And before we move into the substance of today's session on supporting the transformation of juvenile probation, new toolkit for judges, I wanted to help our faculty have a sense of who's participating in today's webinar. So if we could bring up a poll and have each of you pick the best role that reflects your work and your connection with your jurisdiction. So it looks like we have lots of judicial officers, which is great. The toolkit is primarily, that we'll be talking about, is primarily written with you in mind, but we are happy that others that work with judges are participating in the webinar. And it looks like we have those others would be in probation, administration, or supervisory positions, probation officers, some attorneys, that's great. Case managers, service providers, great. So let's see, do we have, okay, great. So I think we can close the poll and just bring up the results. So it looks like we have a distribution of folks, but primarily judicial officers. So Judge Cubbin, Judge Calloway, and Judge Gaither, you'll be talking to your kindred spirits out there, among others. Okay, so at this point, I would like to turn things over to Judge Calloway and have Judge Calloway warm us up to the topic.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. And it's so wonderful to see all of you all, or see your names, or hear all of you all here with us. we're going to start off with just another exercise. This is a warm up so that we have some idea about where you are and your understanding about supporting transformation. So the first question is, in what year did the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges issue its resolution regarding juvenile probation? What year did we have a resolution regarding the juvenile probation? I'm going to give you about 2 more seconds. I'm going to count 1, 2. All right, we're going to close it up and see if you got the right answers. Oh, I think we got some work to do. I think we got some work to do. You will find more about what the right answer is, but all of those who are in that 38% of 2017, you win a prize. Now, I don't have your names, nor do I have any way to give you a prize, but just go back saying you know more than a whole lot of other people about this issue. All right, so we're going to close that one, and we're going to start one more poll at this time. The next question is about how many youth are placed on some form of probation each year nationwide. About how many youth do we place on probation each year nationwide? All right, I'm going to give you a little more time on this one, 3 seconds. I'm going to count 1, 2, 2.5. All right, close it up. 3. All right, we did a much better this time. This time we got 58% of y'all had the right answers. The rest of you all, the 36 plus 5, we're going to give you some more information as we continue to talk. And so thank you all for the little warm up, and I'm glad you all are ready. And I'm going to turn it over now to Judge Coven so she can start us off with our learning objectives.
Thank you. So thank you for joining us today on this very exciting and innovative topic for all of you to be exposed to today. And I have to tell you, the toolkit is wonderful, and you'll have it on your desk, and you'll be using it more than you imagine. So our learning objectives today, they're not lofty, they're not complicated. Our intention is to increase your familiarity with National Council's work to support juvenile probation transformation. So as I said, you're amongst the first to see the role of the judge in transforming juvenile probation, the Toolkit for Leadership. It's an excellent resource, and we're going to talk it up as much as we can. We want you to learn a little bit about probation transformation practices, and all 3 of us are going to give you a little insight to one of our practices that we have want to share with you and that we have put into practice in our respective jurisdictions. And we want you to learn about some strategies for addressing challenges to probation transformation.
And Malika, you can bring us to the next slide. And Judge Gaither, can you unmute? I think you're on mute. Yeah, I know. Unmute.
Well, good morning and or good afternoon, everyone, and fellow judges and practitioners wherever you are. Greetings from Indianapolis, where all the children are well and the weather is nice. We want to talk about the resolutions that have been enacted by the National Council in, get this, take notes, 2017. These resolutions were drafted and put into play. Now, as you know, the National Council is the oldest judicial membership organization. So these resolutions really become the gold standard. They set the tone. They give you cover. They give you a feel-good moment. They give you the nuts and bolts of how to do and what to do. And it's like the flagship. They tell you where to go and what to do. So can we click on the link? Ms. Stephanie, can we click on the link and so they'll show up?
Yeah, hold on just 1 second. Malika, if you
Yeah.
can stop share, I can pull this up on screen.
And if you saw on that one slide at the very bottom, it said they're worth reading. They really are worth reading. They're worth your time. And so you can see these are standard resolutions. Not like your New Year's Eve resolutions where you all promise to not drink heavily or excessively, to eat better and those kinds of things. These are real resolutions that really do benefit children and families. And if followed and if implemented, your jurisdiction will improve the overall outcomes for all the children in your jurisdiction and make life better for your families. Your detention centers will become, we're trying to make them obsolete. Your behavior standards will improve, and everybody will have a feel-good moment if these resolutions are followed and implemented. And you have my guarantee on that. And not that I used to sell cars, but I'm just telling you, I've read these resolutions and they really do work. So these firm decisions to do or not to do something is something that the National Council urges on all of us, because I know, we like roadmaps, we like protocols, we like standards, we like to be told what to do or how to do it or follow within reason, and that is exactly what these resolutions do. So please take note, everyone. Read each one, understand each one. Reach out to your colleagues for discussion, but let's implement them as we go. Remember, 2017. There you go.
Thank you, Judge Gaither. And Judge Callaway now is also going to share some insight into how we move from the resolutions to the toolkit by some of the steps along the way to make the practices set forth in the toolkit actually doable. And whoops, let's see.
I'm going to interrupt. I think we're going to watch the probation transformation video first.
Yep.
So as many of you, and I would suggest most of you know that are on this webinar, the Annie Casey Foundation has been committed to the notion, amongst other things, to reduce the number of children that are confined, whether they're in detention or a long-term facility, particularly focusing on reducing, addressing disproportionate number of Black and brown children in detention and long-term facilities. So amongst those goals is an effort to reimagine or transform probation across the country. Again, thinking about the disproportionality that we see so often in our courtrooms and in our probation departments. So this video, which was prepared by the Annie Casey Foundation, and it's narrated by Steve Bishop, who has really directed this effort with his team looking at probation transformation, speaks to these issues. It's a great tool to begin the conversations that you'll have with your staff or your colleagues or your community. And I think you'll enjoy this. So with that said, if someone could play it, please. Thank you.
Every year, thousands of youth are put on juvenile probation, more than half for low-level offenses, like shoplifting or acting out in school. Kids are being hauled into court for behavior that used to simply get them referred to their parents or principal, and this happens disproportionately to kids of color. Being on probation comes with curfews, restrictions on where you can go, orders on who you can hang out with, and rules that are so convoluted and hard for anyone to follow without a slip-up, especially for teens whose brains are still developing. Once a kid messes up, like missing curfew a few times, he's violated probation. This often results in a young person removed from their families, locked up in a juvenile facility, their education is disrupted, their job is lost. They often end up worse off than if the system hadn't gotten involved in the first place. Kids should still be held accountable, but in ways that help them grow up and mature. Kids need support, not court dates and criminal records for normal teenage behavior. We know what works with young people. There are effective ways to promote personal growth and positive behavior change in youth. The Annie E. Casey Foundation has developed a vision for transforming juvenile probation based on human development and intervention strategies that have been shown to reduce delinquency, and from real-world pilots in cities and counties across the country. It's all about setting young people up for success as adults. We can start by diverting young people with nonviolent, low-level charges from juvenile court altogether and towards community organizations, human service agencies, and their own families. Probation officers could then focus their time on youth who do pose a significant risk for serious offending. Second, we should emphasize incentives, not sanctions. For generations, juvenile probation has been built around punishment. But research makes clear this approach is totally backwards. Incentives as small as movie tickets can motivate young people to do positive things, like succeed in school and remain drug-free. Third, we must commit to racial and ethnic equity. While only 40% of the country's youth population are youth of color, they are overrepresented on probation caseloads and diverted less frequently than their white peers. And youth of color represents 68% of youth held in residential custody for a technical violation. That's being locked up for breaking rules, not breaking the law. Finally, we should build young people's skills, decision-making, and positive connections. Those are the real game changers. We know what to do. Now it's time to get probation right.
Thank you. That was a wonderful video, and it's something that we all need to seriously take to heart. And when we think about the resolutions and where we are on probation transformation, this just didn't happen in a vacuum. This was work that has been done by the National Council of Juvenile Court and Family Judges and others for many, many years. It really began back in 2016 when a group of judges, along with the National Council, met in Austin, Texas. And in that meeting, they talked about probation and they talked about the way our youth minds work. And they started to talk about transforming probation. And one of the things that they did at that meeting was they gave each other a list of probation rules that they had in their jurisdiction. And they looked at the rules and they said, if this were you on probation now, how many of these rules would you violate? And from my understanding, they had a very rich and deep conversation about that. And most of them admitted that they would violate their probation. And so they knew if that were true, and we're talking about young people whose brains are not fully developed, then we need to do something different with our probation. And so from that group came a group in 2019. And this is the one time that we can say what happens in Vegas does not stay in Vegas. This is the one time that we want to share what we did in Vegas. And at that point, there was an input from the Judicial Advisory Group talking about what we needed to do in order to transform probation. And even beyond that group, there were surveys that were sent out, surveys that went to judges and probation administrators. And there were also surveys that went to actual probation officers, to the people who are actually working with the youth day to day on the street level. And from those surveys and those findings, what we decided or what we learned is that we needed that research, the research findings, what was effective and what was not effective. And now we know, and that's what's in the toolkit. We also wanted to know what practices were going to promote race equity. And those are also in the toolkit now. We, as the groups and the surveys found, wanted to use data to understand the current picture of practices and to track improvements. And this toolkit will help us as we reach that goal. And of course, we need training. And that's one of the things that we can discuss in the toolkit as well. But one of the also more important things is about building consensus for reform. And so now we have a vision of reform, and we need to learn how to involve the justice and community stakeholders, probation administrators, supervisors, frontline staff, justice-involved families early and often in the planning and the making change. All of these things that we discussed led us to the toolkit. And Judge Gaither will walk us through that.
So the toolkit is a roadmap, as I explained before. It tells you exactly what to do and how to do it. It helps us as judges help our systems support and not just report. You know, the it really this reform that we are urging all of us to adopt really is a new way of thinking, and we really are trying to make juvenile court and family courts not just your granddaddy's court, but make it more supportive for children and families so that we can improve their outcomes. And so this toolkit helps us to adopt new approaches and new practices that should be taken up by all the system stakeholders. So and it works. They work whether you are in the metropolitan areas of the East Coast, or the high plains of the Midwest, or the sweltering heat of the Southwest. No matter the size and rumble of your jurisdiction, these policies, these practices can work. I'm really struggling to read my screen. Can we go to the table of contents, Steph? So there we go. Watch this. This is so magical. So, and so, right, here's a sample. So as you know, the toolkit is broken down to 5 specific areas. And then each area then is broken down to very clear language. What is the practice? Why do you implement this practice? You know, what are the key elements and so forth? How do we use this practice to promote racial equity? And on and on and on. I mean, it could not be any more simple. And the beauty of this is this document was written for judges, by judges, and for judges to use. And this is how we assert, not that we need to assert control, but this is how we demonstrate leadership in practice reform. So you don't have to rustle around, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, you don't have to call collaborative meetings and try to figure out how you do it. This toolkit provides that information for you. So I would urge each and every one of you to grab a hold of this as soon as you can. Read it, drink a cup of coffee with it, and talk about it with your systems and your community partners. And let's get about the business of establishing practice reform.
I think before we go further into the toolkit, we need to take a little break and give you all a poll again, just to see where you are in transformation and what you already know. So as we work, Stephanie, I think we're ready for the next poll. The traditional model of juvenile probation, with its emphasis on surveillance and rule compliance, is consistent with what we know about adolescent development. I hope we get 100% on that. Is that true or false? True or false? The traditional model of juvenile probation, with its emphasis on surveillance and rule compliance, is consistent with what we know about adolescent development. All right, let's close it, Stephanie, and see what our results are. We're close. 94%. And I thank you, the 6% of you all who answered that way. Hopefully we'll all get to the same point where we can be 100% on this afterwards. All right, so our next question: what is recommended practice for motivating youth behavior change? Focus on short-term rule compliance, motivate compliance through threat of punishment, offer incentives and rewards for progress with behavior change goals, or impose a long list of rules. All right, we'll give you another few seconds. I think we're going to be 95% on this one as well. All right, Stephanie, let's close it. All right, 98. Y'all are getting even better than I thought. All right, and so our last poll for right now is: what can judges do to promote race equity for youth on probation? Undertake implicit bias training for court and probation staff, review data to identify any racial or ethnic disparities, look for lingering bias in probation procedures, such as conditions or responses to violations, or all of the above. All right, countdown, countdown. All right, close it, Stephanie. Let's see what we got. There we go. I knew we'd get there. I knew we'd. This is a wonderful group, and I think I'm going to turn it over to Judge Cubbin. I think you've got them already laid out. They're ready. They're warmed and ready to go.
So the toolkit. If you are a person like me and you like to be very organized, this is a very organized toolkit. It is easily accessible, and you can, maybe if you have a lingering question in your mind related to adolescent development or probation or samples of probation practices, let's say in incentives and rewards, that you can quickly access that information, which we're all busy, we know that, and it's very helpful. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the 5 areas of practice change or reform that judges can impact. So before I talk about that, I do want to make this one acknowledgement. I know we have 50 states and 50 different ways of doing business, although we do have trends. There's teams we're in. For example, in Lucas County, the judge and the court runs the probation department. I know that that is not the case in some other states. And we have some suggestions in the toolkit of how judges can impact or have influence over some of the practices, even though they may not necessarily have, I'll just say, control or administrative authority over probation in their jurisdictions. So with that said, we have 5, the toolkit has 5 different, as I said, areas of practice or reform that judges can impact. So as we begin to look at it, the first one is individualized goal-oriented case planning, incentives and rewards, minimizing conditions of probation, alternatives to confinement in response to violations, probation as a disposition for youth involved in serious delinquency, and diversion or informal processing of all other youth. Again, we have a link here to the toolkit that if you're looking at the table of contents, which you did just look at, you can see that each one of the areas really kind of has the same format of how you can proceed if you want to address one of these issues or you have questions about them. So as we look at these, it pretty much looks like we start, one might say, I guess I'll say that one might say that the challenges may become more and more complicated as you move from the first to the last. I mean, the last is probation as a disposition for youth involved in serious delinquencies. I know for any of you that are sitting right now, you're at your desk saying, what? We'll never do that. We're never going to do something like that. I can swear to you that the first time I heard about or talked about this notion of having just felony offenders on probation in a meeting with stakeholders from our community, our response was, well, that's never going to happen in Toledo, Ohio, just telling you. And you'll stay tuned when I speak again on that topic. But when you look at this, there's really no order. I would suggest that there are probably people, and I assume there are people in the audience right now who really maybe have started to talk about probation reform and reimagining probation in your jurisdictions as we look at juvenile justice in general. And I would suggest that maybe if you have a juvenile drug court or if you have another specialty court, you probably have a lot of work you've done in your jurisdiction around incentives and rewards, as an example. So you may have already looked at that topic and you're satisfied with how your community is dealing with that. that gives you an opportunity then to move on to maybe one of the other sessions. And so, Judge, you're going to talk about the what, why, and hows of the toolkit.
So as we have already seen, how the toolkit is broken down, and you can see, I don't have to read the slide, but you can see very clearly how these things work. Now, I want to focus on this one area though. At the bottom, it says how judges can support the practice, because this really provides the information or the impetus really on how we can make these things happen, because there are some things that you can do while on the bench, but a lot of the work takes place off of the bench, and the toolkit gives you step-by-step practice areas of how to make things happen, how to marshal your community partners, how to support your systems partner, and to make these things happen. And so the toolkit, as it explains there, gives you very basic information. I mean, it's and it's written all in two syllable or maybe even three syllable words sometimes, so you don't you don't need a thesaurus to sort of figure out how to make it happen. And Judge Cubbin is right. We may have 50 different ways of how to do it, but the toolkit gives you a step-by-step program how to make it work in every jurisdiction of the country. And the key elements are broken out very, very nicely. And I got to keep this, as the kids say, got to keep it 100. The fact that we can talk about racial equity, racial inclusion, in an open forum like this in 2021 is a great step in progress, because I don't believe we would have had this conversation certainly in 1961, may not have had it in 1971, but here in 2021 we're having open and robust conversations about racial equity and what we as judges can do to promote racial equity in the youth justice system and in the child welfare system. Steph, yeah, okay. And so that it is in a nutshell of exactly what the toolkit provides.
Thank you, Judge Gaither. And before we go much further in telling you about what we do in each of our jurisdictions and how we are the probation transformation is underway, we want to take a poll for you and the things that you have done. So for our very next poll, what we want you to put down is the probation practices that are being undertaken in your jurisdiction. And you can check as many as applies to your jurisdiction. Hopefully we'll have like 100% in every jurisdiction, but we'll see. So take a few minutes. Are you all doing individualized goal-oriented case planning? Are you using incentives and rewards? Are you minimizing the conditions of probation? Are you finding alternatives to confinement in response to the violations? And are you using probation as a disposition for youth involved in serious delinquencies and diverting or informal processing all the other youth? Where are you in your jurisdiction? And to take 2 more seconds and answer that question. And I think that should probably enough time. Stephanie, do you want to open the poll up? All right, great. I love that 86% of us are already doing alternatives to confinement in response to violations. It looks like you all have probably used everything in the toolkit, and you're going to make us all get to 100% soon. These are great numbers. Thank you, Stephanie. We can close that one, and then we'll put up the next one, which is what probation practice reform aids do you need? What are the probation practice reform aids? And check all that apply for you. Are you using your data? Are you focusing on race equity? Are we involving the frontline staff, the supervisors, administrators, stakeholders, and community members in planning, carrying out, and sustaining probation transformation practice? And are we involving the justice affected youth and their families in planning and carrying out and sustaining our probation transformation practice? What aids are you using now, and what aids are we using now? And then we'll talk about what we can do later on to make it better. If you'll go ahead and submit that, and Stephanie will give them, there we go. All right. We got some good stuff. We got a lot of people using more data now. We're involving everybody, stakeholders, and frontline staff. We need some help on focusing on race equity and involving our justice affected youth and families. I could say honestly that's where we are too in Tennessee, but I will turn it over now so that so that now we can hear from Judge Gaither again about where they are in Indianapolis.
Thank you. Thank you. So we were fortunate to be at the deep dive probation reform discussion in Washington, D.C. in 2019. And since that time, we have begun a robust conversation about probation reform and transformation of probation in a number of areas. And so we have committees and subcommittees on these very important topics. Now, we already were having a conversation about what to do with youth that were congregating at our shopping centers in the downtown area. And so we had a conversation. It was multidisciplinary team that was put together with probation, the courts, law enforcement, and the community, commercial community is there with and the like. And so earlier this year, let me just be very, very honest. I think the prosecutor had enough and decided to go on his own. And what he did, and we were all very, very supportive, but the prosecutor on his own decided that he was no longer going to arrest low-level, low-risk, low-need youth, and instead decided on his own, when these kids were collected at these various locations, he would have them participate in the Boys and Girls Club, that he would actually buy them memberships, full year memberships in the Boys and Girls Club. Because now he didn't say this directly, but we can all reason that the membership for Boys and Girls Club is $25. And so, but the cost to prosecute a misdemeanor offense is greater than $25 when you add in attorney time and judge time and probation time. And so these low-level offenses includes disorderly conduct, trespass, curfew violations, and the like. It did not include gun cases. And so these kids, rather than being put into the system or diverted to the Boys and Girls Club, because we're giving them something to do. And so we're going to review this in 90 days and then we'll see how it's going. But he sort of just went on his own. You could argue whether or not he's following JDAI principles, but you cannot argue about how, I must have used this word 3 times already, robust. I need another word that talks about how expansive this diversion program is. Judge Cubbin?
Thank you. So Lucas, I'll talk about that screen in a little bit, but Lucas County had begun our efforts toward juvenile reform back in 2013. So we have had a pretty long road that we have developed with lots of off-ramps and ways that we can best meet the needs of our children in our community. I'm going to talk a little bit about our probation is for felony offenders only. So like Judge Gaither said, and I'm going to imagine every single person on this call has continued our efforts toward diversion. It's been very active toward that. In looking at ways that we can just minimize the touch of children in our community, we knew that we had to have some sort of responses for certain misdemeanor offenses, domestic violence in particular. So we developed a family violence intervention program for youth adjudicated those offenses. We decided to open a misdemeanor services department, adjudicated misdemeanors with a timeline of 90 days for soft touches, but focused touches to meet the child's particular needs that brought them before the court in general. As we knew that if we wanted to address serious felony offenders, we really only needed to have the kids on probation that really needed to be on probation, and giving the probation officers really specific tools to address the serious felony offenders in our community. Things that I'm going to imagine most of you and many of you have in your communities, like, cognitive behavioral therapy, ethics, multi-system therapy, family FFT, motivational interviewing, positive youth justice activities. We have a family navigator program for families who are court involved. While their matters are court involved, we have kind of family members from Family Navigator that hold the hands and help the families walk through the programs. Mentors, lots of things that I know a lot of you have, wraparound services. So all of those tools are made available to our probation department, and they have much smaller caseloads and a lot of community participation to keep the offenders in the community and to provide those services. As a final thing that we've done, and we could have a whole conversation for a whole half day just talking about the gun violence across our country and easy access of firearms to our youth. Knowing that that is in the backdrop of a lot of our conversations, we realized how important it is that if we're going to have serious felony offenders in our community, we have to really be able to ensure community safety. So we took on our programming from one of our residential lockdown facilities that we run in Lucas County and we have taken that programming and we have set that programming up in a day treatment program so that the children are being monitored from the moment they get up till about 10 o'clock at night, and having the opportunity to use that programming that we normally had focused on the serious offenders that are in this facility, but in a way that they can stay home and they can be even more actively participating in the program with their families. So the only thing I would add to this is I know a lot of you are doing a lot of work in your community, and what we did is develop a continuum of services that met the needs for our kids in Toledo that we developed, and then we can use in the community, ensuring public safety, being able to talk to the community by doing what? A collaboration with community partners and stakeholders and monitoring their progress through data and performance measures. So Judge Calloway?
Absolutely. Thank you, Judge Coven. I come to this group as being very transparent as a child who used to get in a little trouble growing up. I don't know how, but imagine that. But then also as a former public defender, I was well aware of the problems of using detention, particularly as a response to probation violations, was problematic. There's no question that what we know now from research is that detention was definitely a harsh and punitive way to respond to breaking rules. And it causes more long-term, serious, lasting harm with many of our youth. Knowing that detention does not do anything to reduce further arrest or protect public safety, and that youth who are in detention are more likely to be incarcerated and suffer mental health symptoms as adults. They're less likely to graduate from high school, less likely to attend college, and literally less likely to earn a good living and to be productive citizens in our communities. And I also was well aware of the severe racial and ethnic disparities of detention, particularly in our county and in our state. And so it was not, it was an easy thing for me when I became juvenile court judge to say, we will no longer be using detention as a response to violations. Now, what became difficult was doing it without having support. And one of the things that I've learned, especially through the process of transformation and the information that the toolkit, is that you have to be prepared to eliminate confinement and have better responses for violations. Now, I promise you, when I came and I did it and I said, we're not doing incarceration, we're not doing those violation of probation where we're locking kids up, my probation staff felt a little some way about it because at the time, we still weren't diverting a whole lot of people, but they had a large caseloads. And so with a large caseload, they had nothing else to really do. And we had not started rolling out using things like individual case plans and short-term goals for our youth, and short-term probation terms. We weren't doing those. And so it was the challenge I had when, in order to do this, I had a staff that was used to doing it one way, and I was not giving them tools to do it a different way. And so that was some of the things that we had to overcome. We had to overcome literally a resistance to change and say, we got to do things different. We got to do things better. And this toolkit has been very helpful, or the information in toolkit for us was extremely helpful because we learned how to do alternatives to confinement and to do other things instead. We had to shift that attitude. There's a lot of us in this country that still believe that threatening probation or threatening punishment through detention is what's going to change behavior, regardless of what all the research says on what changes behavior, and that is not one of them. We still use that as a way to, that we think that is going to change a youth's behavior. And so we had to learn as a court to shift that attitude and to change it to what we know helps to change behaviors and start doing that instead of using detention as our fallback. And we also had to clarify what accountability really was. Was accountability punishment? Was punishment locking people up? And if we want to hold children accountable for their behaviors, then we have to do things that will help them to reach accountability. And so what we know is that, and I think I see some of the chat, that if we do short-term goals, if we do individual case plans, if we do rewards and incentives and give opportunities, then that is so much better than, and the outcomes are so much better and long lasting than using confinement. And so what we've done in Davidson County is turned it around, and we do not use detention as a way to punish kids for violating rules of probation. And that's why we think this toolkit will help all of us to get to that point in doing that. So I'm going to turn it back over to Judge Cubbin to talk about how you can minimize the conditions of probation.
Thank you. So, what we did is we pulled up one of the documents that you have in the toolkit. And this document, it's a sample probation order. So I'm going to read it to you, and I want you to kind of think about it a little bit because we're going to have an exercise in a second. But this would be a sample probation order. The boxes, the blue boxes, will give you some insight to think about what you would maybe want your order to look like. So the first box, I'll just say, you know, this is a order, this sample probation order, it's for the children and the families, not for the judge and the lawyers. So the juvenile court has found that you violated the law. And as a result, you're being placed on probation for 6 months. During that time, you'll receive court-ordered support and guidance to keep you and others safe and successful. sounds like directed toward a young person who's going to be placed on probation. So while you're on probation, you will have a probation officer. The court or the judge, another word you could use, expects that you will work with your probation officer to develop a case plan that includes short-term goals for you to work on, and that you will try your best to achieve your case plan goals. You will be on probation for 6 months, which means that your probation is expected to be over on whatever date certain. Young people like to know things like that, definite answers. If you make reasonable progress toward the short-term goals of your case plan, you, your lawyer, or your probation officer, separately or together, may request an early termination hearing for this court to decide whether your probation can end early, i.e. less than 6 months. Reasonable progress means you have taken steps toward the goals and have talked to your probation officer about problems. If you do not work with your probation officer to develop a case plan and make progress toward goals, the court may extend your time on probation, and that's your order. Okay? So, and as I said, this is in the toolkit, this form. So we have a little exercise that we're going to do. And Martha, are you going to talk about the exercise?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you, judges. So at this point, we wanted to give you all a chance to chat with one another about probation transformation, and specifically on this practice area of minimizing court orders. What we know from the research and our experience with pilots that Amy Casey has been working with jurisdictions across the country, some courts and probation departments have orders that are actually include 20, even 30 conditions being imposed on youth. A lot of them are don'ts. Some of them are do's, but a lot of them are don'ts. And so what probation and this approach to behavior is really antithetical to adolescent development. And so what this practice area in the toolkit wants to help people focus on and do better with is making probation orders really more manageable and relevant to youth, and so that they can be successful. So what we'd like to spend time with now, and our great support team, tech support team, Stephanie and Malika, will be putting everyone into one of 4 breakout rooms so that you can talk amongst one another, and each of the faculty and myself will be in one of the rooms with you to help with facilitating the conversation. But for in your group, what we'd like you to do is talk about the greatest challenges to implementing the reform of minimizing the number of court conditions for a court order for probation. So what kind of pushback are you likely to get for this approach if the judges or your probation wants to try these orders that are very minimal and just really refers to ask the youth to work closely with the probation officer? And that's really bottom line, and make progress on goals that they develop together. What kind of challenges would be pop up in your jurisdiction in reaction to that, or to maybe undermine that or resist that? And then more importantly, or just as importantly, how could judges address those challenges so that recognizing whatever the resistance or concern or naysayers, but still move forward with probation transformation practice when it comes to minimal court orders that make much better sense with adolescents and really set them up for success rather than failure. So at this point, we'll be all separated into one of 4 groups, and we'll have about 12 to 15 minutes for our discussion. And just asking that whatever group you're in, and facilitator maybe will offer a reminder here, is each group, if somebody would volunteer to be prepared to report out on the key consensus that the group had about both challenges and ways to address the challenges. So I think we're at this point, we'll be put into the breakout rooms, and then we'll also get some reminders about, as we're getting close to the time for the activity to end. So I think we won't be too startled when we are moved back into the large group.
All right, I will go ahead and start the breakout rooms, everyone. You'll get a pop-up on your screen that says join, and please click that.
I didn't get to say bye to my group. Bye, my group.
I didn't either. I didn't get to say goodbye to my group. And my group, so Holly was speaking about one thing that was effective, and she didn't get to finish talking about it, but maybe when we're all together, she can finish talking about it. So I'm guessing that Stephanie's bringing all the groups back in.
Yes, they all should have rejoined us by now.
Okay.
Well, I don't know how many solutions we came across, but we sure had a good time talking. I'll say that.
Fantastic. And let's see, Judge Cubbin, is she back with us?
She is.
Okay. So should we, I think, I don't remember the notes, but is it Judge Cubbin that's gonna facilitate the report out, or is it me?
I think it was Judge Cubbin.
Okay.
But you can always exercise executive privilege.
I know, right?
Can you hear me now?
There she
Yes.
is.
Okay, thank you.
So Judge, did you want to facilitate the report out?
Sure.
Okay.
But I don't see the chat, so I'm gonna have to ask for volunteers. So if I can ask,
Well, Judge, I'll just let you know that the Stacy in my group is the spokesperson that and Holly was
Yeah.
sharing, and then we got switched. So if you want to ask Stacy to report, and then maybe even Holly to finish saying what she was saying.
okay, so Stacy, would you
Yeah.
like to report out?
Sure. So
Let's
our
see
group
it.
talked a little bit about some experience with already decreasing rules. And so I'd just like to share really quickly because they had some really good ideas. It was out of Stark County, Ohio, decreased their rules for sort of general probation from 12 to 4 and for sex offenses from 14 to 7. But I just really liked that he talked about any of the rules that were in regards to a substantial risk of harm were eliminated, and any language that kind of just spoke to unruly behavior was eliminated. And I will just also say I'm very jealous that they've had truancy eliminated from their court system, because that is a big struggle that our office has. So I would love to also see that. But some of the challenges that we talked about was pushback from law enforcement and specifically school resource officers. And that came out of Ohio, but I would say our office also has that experience. We've had a lot of reports from our parents that they, contact law enforcement for something going on, and law enforcement will tell them, oh, the juvenile office won't do anything about it, so we're not going to report it. And it eliminates any ability to get any, services in place. And then I also talked about in our office just the internal kind of cultural change to make this happen. And I shared a story that our judge attended a training last week and had a young woman presented in court. She is currently pregnant for detention and possible placement into our state facilities. And judge simply stood up and said he would not place her in detention or in a residential facility, that the officer needed to figure out what her real needs were and focus on that and do that. So just having that real strong support from the judge. We also talked about in Ohio, just the real commitment from even administration, just saying, this is what we're doing, we're moving forward. And having just that really strong commitment to it. And then I know Holly was speaking at the very end of our session and just shared one way that they kind of got buy-in in their office was to take all of their forms and compare them to adult forms and just show their office how closely their forms related to adult forms. And she said it just worked as like a nice aha moment for their office. So I think that's all I have.
Thank you. Who'd like to volunteer to be next?
Well, we'll go. Where is Rachel Marks?
I'm here, Judge.
There you go.
So our group identified, I mean, I think we'll probably hear some similar themes, but really the kind of overarching challenge came down to the biggest one of all, which is shifting people's kind of value and belief system over what's effective. You know, what does it really mean to have a safe community? And, you know, what's most useful for helping people change? And so kind of underneath that overarching theme, really just recognizing that change overall is really difficult for people. And so it's, aside from just the value system side of it, just actually shifting practices is very, very difficult. Of course, getting people to actually land on what the new should be, and having some consistency without that. Judge coined, I think, a new term that was quite lovely. Really shifting people's kind of Neanderthalic worldviews and beliefs that the kids that come to our system are bad kids, and essentially anything less than lots of rules and or use of detention is kind of a failure to the community and the maintenance of public safety. And so shifting to the more positive side, some ideas about how to overcome that. I think the biggest one was really just a whole lot of conversations and community outreach, really using the data and research of showing what do these alternative practices do to actually impact helping you change, preventing recidivism, maintaining public safety. The suggestion of looking at juvenile drug treatment courts and really that kind of more positively oriented model and how that's led to different and more positive outcomes while still maintaining public safety. Webinars like this that are sharing out toolkits about how to go about the change. I think practical application sometimes we can all get behind a philosophy, but actually doing it can feel just really overwhelming and difficult sometimes. So the more support and tools people have, the better. And then the last comment that came at the very end, but was so powerful, was really tapping into what does your community want and kind of looking at local political will to drive more public serving agencies. How do we shift our work to reflect what our community expects of us, hopefully for the better? Judge, I'm not sure if I missed anything. Feel free to chime in, please.
No, you nailed it.
Excellent. Next.
I think
I can go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
No, you go, David. Go ahead.
Am I fine? Okay. So I'll just discuss our group. First of all, about changing probation orders difficulties. We talked about that's getting everyone on the same page. This is a big undertaking. It could be a statewide issue. There's several judges, there's several committees. There's a lot of things that has to be going through to get to this side. So there's a lot of to get there. Also the logistics of it, the different jurisdictions, again, the statewide issue of how do we go about actually doing this? You know, like in our state, is it just on a county level? Do we do this on a state issue? How do we get this going? Another topic that was brought up is that, you know, don't just say like, okay, don't do this anymore. It's give us the tools and something to have in place the real practical way that how we can look at how do we actually implement this and actually sample tools about replacing that issue. So there was a distinction that was made up with ours about, I guess there's that kind of summary page for the youth and family. I guess there still is the court order, but I guess the sample use summary is for the family and kids. So I think there was a distinction there. Maybe it doesn't get rid of the court order, but there was maybe a sample page. And so I think there was kind of a distinction. Does that get rid of it or in place of it, or is it something in addition to? And
I'll just chime in there that that's
Okay, go
not
ahead.
what the sample order that we gave is what's intended. There would not be some supplemental something or other. That sample order would be the order.
Okay.
If I'm understanding your question, David, yes.
Yeah, I guess there was a distinction there. Is it people have maybe different understandings of that. So I guess maybe that has to be something that's brought up, or maybe a distinction of the jurisdiction. So, okay, thank you. So, and then the next issue was how can judges respond to the challenges or advance these changes? And one real practical thing was actually to give that supplemental, that summary, make sure it gets to the kid and the family at the end of the hearing there in a real practical way there. So, and maybe the judge can actually look at explaining to those that are resistant the importance of what we do. You know, how does this benefit the youth and family? How does this benefit long term? So what's the overall goal that we're actually doing, and can this actually reach our end here? So, and another one is the judge to bring education to everyone in a multi-system way. There's a lot of different parties, and we're gonna have to bring all the parties to the table. We have the judges, we have probation, we have prosecution, and bring them all to the table to get them educated, and we can join together on this endeavor. That's it for me.
All right, I'll introduce Teresa Harkins, and she will lead the Judge Callaway Room group.
Thank you, Judge. So our group kind of echoed some of the similar things other groups have said so far, but one big challenge is just how many staff, whether that is for the court or law enforcement or, you know, different agencies, are used to doing things a certain way. You know, some of that is automatic. There's really not a lot of thought behind the why we do it this way. And so having to change in multiple systems how people are thinking about what they are doing and how they are approaching our citizens. And then just also the perception of, you know, going from that old school crime and punishment to this new age of learning new behaviors. We did also discuss that getting DAs to buy in and getting law enforcement to buy in, as well as some judges to buy in. There was some discussion about technical violations after 1 or 2 times leading to confinement, and how we can respond to these challenges. One really good point that was brought up was really hitting the evidence-based practices and the data, and using that to support, you know, our data-informed decision-making in our processes and procedures. Some other challenges we described, administratively and provider-wise, there are wait lists for youth and families to get services. And with case term limits, it's sometimes hard to balance that shorter case term with making sure families are getting adequate services. Some additional responses we came up with, just to keep advocating for the change, working with teams to vet out service providers. Maybe we can locate new community stakeholders that might be able to provide a service in a different way, or fill time for that youth in a way that is maybe out of the box from the case plan. collaborating with other agencies. And just again, kind of circling back to that education piece, how we see better outcomes when youth are not in detention.
Thank you. Judge Calloway?
All right, thank you. So we've shared a lot and we've done a lot of group discussions and we are about ready to close this session. We definitely appreciate all of you all that you all have been here and worked through this with us. One thing that we want to say is that you all should definitely download the toolkit, share it with others who aren't believers yet, and share it with them to help us as a group to transform nationwide juvenile probation so that next year when we come back, that instead of having 250,000 kids on probation, our numbers are much, much lower and we have much better success rate for all of our youth that are in the system. So I want to close with a quote from Maya Angelou, and she says, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better." And so everybody on this call now knows better. So let's do better. I want you each to grab your phone at this point, put in your, or I guess you could do it on your computer. I'm not fancy enough to do it both ways, but put in your browser mentee.com. And when it says Mentimeter, add in, we lost the code. It's 714.
Oh, no, wait a minute. Sorry, Judge Calloway. Yeah, you're right. We had a change and it's in the chat. The new number is, there it is. That's, can everybody see it? It's
3272 8113. 3272 8113. And when you pull it up, it says, what does it mean to do better? What is doing better? And just put in what you think is doing. I love it. Supportive. Put in as many words as you want. What word do you think doing better? I like consistency. Listening to kids. Holistic. Individual. Trauma informed. Less kids on probation. Woo-hoo. Less time on probation. Educate. I can't put my word in. I'm looking at y'all's words so much. Y'all got great ones. Leadership, considerate, fairness, uplifting, successful youth. That should be the one that ends up being the big. We got more. Awesome. That's what doing better is for our youth. And I love that. Empowering, equity, true accountability, freshness, better communities. Awesome. All right. So we thank you for your time, and I'm going to turn it over to Martha to close us out.
Okay, thank you so much, Judge Calloway. Thank you all, Judge Calloway, Judge Gaither, and Judge Cubbin, and all of you participants. We appreciate how engaged you've been, how much you care about the subject, and we're so glad that you could join us for the last hour and a half. Here's contact information for all the faculty and myself. If you want to follow up with any of us to learn more or to get technical assistance, please feel welcome to do that. Once the webinar is closed, we will have an email go to you to ask you to complete a quick evaluation. It's anonymous, confidential, and we just would enjoy getting your feedback. We use your feedback when we plan future webinars and training sessions and so forth. I really want to thank you all for your great work that you're already doing to promote probation transformation, and hope that you find the toolkit as support for what you're already doing and spreading the word and continuing to change the face of probation and ultimately the lives of young people. That's really what we're all about. So thank you all so much for your time. It's been such a pleasure Judges, thank you for your time as well. And everybody have a great rest of the day.
Right, bye-bye.
Bye.